Welcome, everyone. Thank you for spending part of your Wednesday afternoon with us. My name's Bryn Durgan, and I'm the Director of Programming here at Bookstore One. And for a lot of you, I know it's welcome back. And for some of you, welcome in. If you haven't been to any of our author talks or book clubs, or workshops, any of our events before, then I would strongly suggest that you sign up for our email news blast right down at the front register so you can get notified of more events like these. But thank you so much for being here today. If it weren't for your support, we wouldn't be able to be doing what we're doing. Now, let me introduce you to the woman and the book of the hour that just came out yesterday. Wow. I know. Sarasota would not be what it is today without the influence of the Ringling family, particularly John and Mabel Ringling and John's brother Charles. Unlike other entertainers of the era, the Ringling family saw their enterprise as a business and a way of entertaining the masses through good, clean fun. The book, Ringling Circus, A History of Sarasota, Florida, and the Famous Ringling Brothers, focuses on the history of this family and brings to life and light their past and present impact on Sarasota's unique artistic, historical, and cultural scene, a rarity in Florida, where much of the economy is driven by tourism and the retirement industry. So we're happy to have the author of this book, the wonderful Sandra Gurvis, here with us today to tell us about the making of the book. So let's give her a big round of applause. And the first thing, Sandra's got quite a bio, so I figured instead of rattling that off, I would first start by asking how it was that you, a native of Dayton, Ohio, and author of some 18 books covering topics ranging from Ohio history and tourist spots to Paris Hilton, like I said, quite a range, and a couple of novels, were drawn to John Ringling, his family, and their circus.
Okay, and is this working okay? Yep. Good. Well, in order to understand that, and I really had to think about that question because is that the very first book I wrote was about unusual museums in America, and it was in the early 1990s. It was my very first book. I worked very hard to get it published, and I had an agent. Publishing was quite different then. So then I got a publisher for the book, and I was very excited about it. And then they decided to call it the Cockroach Hall of Fame and 101 other off-the-wall museums. I was not happy. I did not want to be known as the author of the Cockroach book. I really didn't. I was insulted. I was upset. And then Good Morning America called. And I'm like, okay, I can do this. So that was my very first book. It was about unusual museums. And so coming here and moving here, which the move here was quite a long process, I realized that I wanted to write about the Ringling Museum because I felt not only my love of museum and unusual things, and Sarasota is a pretty unusual place, which is why I think it's so great, was also my attraction to the Ringling family and the way they lived their lives. I mean, they were pretty honest people. They worked hard. They were passionate about the circus, and they were passionate about bringing the beautiful things in life to Sarasota. So I had an immense respect for that. And this book was quite a project, and I'll talk about that a little bit later, but that's why I wrote the book. And I was lucky enough to get Roman and Littlefield Pineapple Press because I'd written other books for them as a publisher. So to me, it was a very happy situation for me anyway.
Yeah, congratulations.
Thank you.
And I think starting with maybe what's the juiciest or the most surprising thing that you discovered doing research for this book? Like something that made you pick up the phone and call a friend and say, can you believe, that kind of thing?
Actually, I didn't call a friend. I called the archivist at the Ringling. We were gossiping about John and Mabel. You know, we started out, I went there so many times, but well, the interesting thing was that John, his second marriage, of course her name escapes me, was a second marriage. Everyone said she was a gold digger. Emily Hadbucks, I think was her name. Everyone said she was a gold digger and she was an opportunist, but surprisingly, she was in John Ringling's corner at the end of his life because he was struggling and he was afraid people were out to rip him off, and she kept trying to get him to protect his interests and to listen to her and to watch his money, and he wouldn't listen. He only did because he was older and he was scared. And it was the thing that really was heart-wrenching to me was the very end of John Ringling's life when they took the circus from him and took all his power away. And the very last chapter, I mean, I get kind of emotional when I talk about it. It's called The Last Parade, and it talks about how John's nephew, I think it was his nephew, went with him to this parade, and he could feel, oh, I get emotional when I talk about it. He could feel John's remembering what it was like when he went to the very first circus in his life, and John was very, overwhelmed by that. So, I mean, I got a sense of him, even though he's been gone almost 100 years, I've got a real sense of him as a person. And I hope that shows through in the book.
Were you able to talk to any relatives?
No, that's one of I have frequently asked questions. And one of the questions that I get was, are there any Ringlings left in Sarasota? So I did what everybody does. I Googled. I went to Google PhD. And I could not find anything really. If there are here, I don't know them, and they're not going to tell me at the museum, they're willing to open up their archives and all their records, but they weren't going to, introduce me to family members. I don't think you can do that.
And speaking of family members then, if you were to write a novel, as someone who also writes fiction, involving any one character from this particular book, your book of nonfiction, who would it be and why?
Oh, that's a heck of a question. Probably Mabel Ringling. She was a very private, mysterious type person. I would like to know what motivates her, what makes her think, because no one really knew her. I mean, she did a lot of good and she was very active, but she was also very private. So, still waters run deep. So as a writer, of course, I like to get underneath the hood of various situations.
So can you tell us about the research process?
Well, it was, the funny thing about writing is it's like an iceberg. It's, the tip of the iceberg is the outline of the book, because every book has to have an outline. And I look at, I can do this. This is simple. It's never simple. It's like the more you delve, the more you find. It was in the middle of the pandemic, which didn't make it exactly the easiest thing in the world. But what I did do, they were nice. The Manatee County Library in particular had an amazing amount of records, especially when there's part of the book is divided into 3 parts: the history of Sarasota, the history of the Ringling family, and the Ringling influence. And in the history of Sarasota, the Manatee County Library had an amazing amount of records and letters, and that was what I was after. It's not the usual canned history, but what the people, the individuals, So that was part of it. And then, of course, I went to the Ringling Museum countless times. And I'm grateful for the archivist there, because she pointed me in the right direction. I would ask her questions and she would say, well, here, here, and here. And she was amazing. But it was really a lot of research. There were 3 books that I used. One was Carl Grismer's The Story of Sarasota. And that book was published in 1947, but that guy had a great sense of humor. I loved his book. It was great. The second one was Henry Ringling North's The Circus King, and that was where I pulled a lot of the personal anecdotes from, especially the part about John and the struggles that he had. And the third one was David Weeks' Ringling in the Florida years. And that David Weeks, I think recorded every single transaction, every single piece of art, every single check that John Ringling ever wrote. And I would read his book, and he had so many details, I'd be like, I can't do this. Because there was just his book was very thorough, and he had footnoted everything was authentic, but it was great because I had something, if I wasn't sure about something, I'm like, it's like, what did Weeks do, that sort of thing. So those were the 3 main.
So how does your book differ from other books that already exist about the circus and the Ringling family in Florida in general?
Yeah, that's one of the things that I always think about when I write a book. The book that preceded this, Myths and Mysteries of Ohio. In fact, a lot of my Ohio books, because there's tons of books about that. I always look for what's different, not just the facts. But this was the same thing, and I don't think that there's any book out there that marries the 3 concepts that I discussed. Talking about the history of Sarasota, the Ringling family, and the museum. I think this book is unique in that way.
And you go far back, history-wise.
Yeah, I do. I go to the very beginning of time when dinosaurs roamed the earth, and Florida was actually pretty chilly back then, I think. But it was more climate friendly than the rest of the world. But yeah, so yeah, I do go back. There was other books that had, a lot of these books, battles and names of generals and things like that. Those books are important. They're important, and it's important for me to take that into consideration. And it was intimidating at times because there was just so much information. And what do I include? What don't I include? A lot of this stuff, not a lot of it, some of it contradicted itself, so I tried to put everything in and cover everything. And, it was quite a project.
Is there something that didn't make the cut that you want to talk to us about?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, the thing that what I wish I could have talked a little bit more was about the circus people. I think there's a book by Kim Poole where she did a lot of discussion of the different types of people who were in the circus. Where are they now? I would have liked to have done more on that, but I had to pretty much stick to the program. Mm-hmm. But you only have so many pages, or I do anyway. And then it's like anything else. Too much information is too much information. So.
So did you move here during the pandemic then?
I did. I wanted to move to Sarasota. Oh gosh, it was probably about maybe 10 or 11 years ago. I kept coming here. I was a travel journalist for a number of years, and I kept coming to Florida to do various stories. And I came to Sarasota the first time, I think, for spring training for the Cincinnati Reds. And I thought I thought it was so cool. I loved the different things, and everything was cheap back then. You go to St. Armand's, you get all kinds of gewgaws. This was a while ago. And then I kept coming back, and I kept coming back because I kept coming to do these different travel stories. And then my friend and I, who I travel with, we started coming here because it was reasonable, and it was warm, and it was beautiful, and it wasn't like super crowded. And because I traveled all around Florida, I've been to just about, but to most of the places. And I remember I did Zumba on the beach of Siesta Key, and I thought I could move here. And that was the beginning of the end, so to speak, the end of my relationship with Ohio anyway. So, but I had planned, in January of 2020, I had planned on moving here. I mean, I wasn't going to move in January. I was going to move in the summer. And my daughter-in-law and my granddaughter and I came up here, and I looked at places to live. And I had everything kind of set up. And then the pandemic happened, and I thought, I'm not going to let anything like a global pandemic stop me from moving. So I did. It worked. I cleaned I didn't have anybody help me clean my place, so I cleaned my place in Ohio. My friends helped me move, which I am indebted to them. And I just, it was fine.
And I wonder what a better way to get to know a place, Florida, Sarasota, than to write a book about it.
Oh, yeah.
About moving here. And I wonder, I know Florida has sometimes an unfortunate stereotype. We have the Florida man and other things like that. And so I wonder how your view or vision of Florida changed after moving, Sarasota specifically, changed after moving here and writing this book in particular.
Well, that was interesting because I used to describe, I grew up in Dayton, which is a small cultured town. I mean, it's not, it's got a little rough edges, but it's got a lot of culture. And I couldn't wait to get out of Dayton. I mean, I was 18 years old and I was out of there. I first graduated high school, and I went to college the summer as soon as I graduated. Couldn't wait to get out of there. And then I graduated college. I moved to Columbus, and Columbus became this very huge city, and it kind of grew up around me. And then I came back here, and I said, oh, Sarasota is like Columbus with an ocean. I moved back here, and it's a really small town. The downtown is very small. Everyone kind of knows everybody, and I'm like, it's like Dayton with an ocean, which is a good thing because I didn't want a huge city anyway. So that was the one thing. And everyone is very nice, and it's an interesting place. It kind of surpassed my expectations in a way because everyone was very friendly. I just felt very comfortable here. And, I'm really happy I moved here. I have to say that. So.
I also wonder if there are any questions that you had when writing this book that have been left unanswered. Of course you weren't able to talk to the family, but what other, sorts of questions are left unanswered?
Oh, I don't know. That's a hard question. I don't know the answer to that. I think that maybe, why is the museum, some of the collections, situation with the collections, it's not a normal museum in this normal sense that it's organized the way a lot of big formal museums are. It's very unique in its own way, and maybe getting a little bit, why is that, that might be one thing. Knowing a little bit more about the Ringling family, and I'd like to know more about their descendants and what happened to the rest of the family, but I also respect the fact that they may not want people to know that, so, you gotta respect that too, so that would be the two unanswered questions I have.
Right. I don't know much about the Ringling Museum. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, it's huge, and it's amazing. It's got something for everyone. You have Kadazan, which is John's home, which is one of the most beautiful places I've ever been to. In fact, I think the museum is one of the most beautiful places I've ever been to. Everything about it, the exterior, the gardens. But you have Kadazan, which is John's home, and it's very 1930. It's very Venetian. It's very, it's very much like Venice. I was fortunate enough to go to the Doge's Palace in Venice. And I was in Italy for like 3 hours about 4 years ago. And I chose to go to oddly enough, I chose to go to the Doge's Palace. And I went and I saw similarities to the Doge's Palace and Kadazan. And it's just a beautiful place. And the interesting thing is it's a home, and you can go in his house and you can see his bedroom, and you can see his first Emily's bedroom, and the first one, Mabel's bedroom, and then you can see Emily's bedroom, and you wonder how, she walked through the passed away wife's bedroom. Well, anyway. So, and you see John's clothes, and and then you see this amazing architectural, these windows, and some of the things that they have there, the woodwork, and it's just amazing. Now you have that. And then you have the museum, which is, I'm not really much of an expert on art, but there's a lot of different things there. Some people go for the Chinese art, the Asian art. Some people go for the Italian art. Some people go for the Dutch artists, which I saw plenty of those because I actually spent a lot of time in Amsterdam. Not a lot of time, but I went to a bunch of museums in Amsterdam. And it's just got a lot of, you can spend a day there or you can spend a couple hours there. It's whatever you want. And then you have my favorite place, one of my favorite, which is the Circus Museum, which has all this crazy stuff. It has this truck that they shot the clowns out of. It's got all these costumes and stuff that it's kind of interactive. It's got John and Mabel's train car, their railroad car, and you have that. And then you have the miniature collection, the Tibbles collection, which I have to admit I was not enthralled. I thought it was okay. My brother-in-law, who's an engineer, went a couple weeks ago and he raved about it. So some people absolutely love that. So you have all those things. And then there's a lot of tangential things about it. There's, in Gibsonton, you have the Showman's Museum. And then there's Bob's Train, which is a cool little place to have, to eat something, get something to eat, and he's very entertaining. So there's all these little ancillary things, and there's all kinds of circuses around Sarasota, and there's also a lot of, that sort of thing.
And so those circuses that are happening now, they do not have anything to do with the Ringling Brothers, or what's that situation?
No, they don't. They're pretty independent. Well, there is one called the Sailor Circus that may be affiliated with it. I'm not 100% sure. Now, I know that Feld Entertainment, which is in Ellington, they launched the circus, the repurposed Ringling Barnum and Bailey Circus. And somebody asked me about, they said, well, they saw the Barnum and Bailey Circus when they were a kid. Well, I said, well, then you saw Ringling, because I think they consolidated in like the early part of the 20th century. So they're one and the same. So there's a new circus out, and there's mostly entertainment and that, acts but no animals. They don't have animals, so.
Okay, before we get to audience questions, I wanted to ask you, what are you working on next?
You're right. I'm writing a satire about the villages. That's a loaded question. Yeah, it's called, and I am one, so don't be offended. It's called Doing Hard Time in Geezerville. So I can say that, because I am one. but it's a little bit edgy. It's a murder mystery kind of, and it's a satire, and it's a little bit edgy. And I will see what happens. I got an agent who's interested in it. I'm having a great time.
It's a whole other kind of
so much. It's a different circus altogether. It's more like a zoo. But there's so much great material, and I'm having a good time writing it. So we'll see what happens with this one. So I do enjoy my satire. I do enjoy my humor.
Yeah, I've noticed some humor in this book. Okay, so what questions? Anybody can just raise their hand and we'll call them. Go ahead.
Good afternoon. I'm sure this is answered in your book, but there was always a suggestion that Mabel Ringling's origins were rather mysterious or rather obscure. Can you
Well,
address that?
actually, that's a very good question, because Mabel, I think, was from Ohio. Okay. And the biggest mysterious thing, and she was a mysterious figure. Like I said, she'd be a great subject of a novel. But the thing of it is, the big mystery around Mabel is, how did she and John meet? Because one story is that she was working in the circus. One story is he met her at Atlantic City. And one story is he met her, I believe, in Chicago. And I do address that in my book.
I look forward to it.
Yeah, she was quite enigmatic. But they had a very interesting marriage. And in my book, I also talk about, he had I believe it was a butler. I believe his last name was Taylor, I'm not sure. And I got a copy of his book. I was able to get a copy of his book because they told me about it at the Ringling bookstore. And he wrote about his experiences with John Ringling, working for him as an employee. And he had some interesting things to say about John and Mabel's marriage in there too. So, it's very interesting. Any other questions? Come on.
Well, yeah, so what was interesting, some of the highlights of their marriage that were interesting?
Well, I think that they were just two peas in a pod. They both loved art. They both loved the finer things in life. He was mostly the collector and she was mostly the decorator. And it just was like an amazing collaboration between the two of them, that they could do that. And they had a very interesting set of friends, and they traveled. And John Ringling was no angel, I will say, now that I'm remembering this. He was no angel. And she kind of turned to look the other way with that too. Because I talk a little bit about that. So I got a little bit of information about that too.
What brought them down, the family, to Sarasota to begin with?
Well, actually, John and Mabel were thinking about wintering in Florida, because like everybody else, nobody likes winter up north, or most people don't anyway. So they actually were in one part of Florida. And because he was a circus person, back then in the early 1900s, early 20th century, people kind of looked down on him. And he was very wealthy. This whole John the Dutch boy or whatever, it was like the internet lives forever. With this picture of John being a Dutch boy or whatever, he was a clown, just kind of followed him around, and he always had that, he's a circus man, he's not, the New York 400. So, when they went down there, people were, they tried to get into society, and people were not very nice to them. They were kind of, whatever. I guess in one part of Florida, it was kind of close to Tampa, if a memory serves. And then he had a friend who bought a house or bought some land in Sarasota. And John went to visit his friend, and he fell in love with the area. And they bought land, and that's where the museum is now, and they built houses. And he was going to do a Miami. He went to do something similar to Miami, Florida. He was going to make it that big, and it was going to be his show. It was going to be the John and Mabel show. So that's what drew him. He just fell in love with the area, like everybody else, and he was in a good situation where he could buy the whole thing. So, they owned more land than anybody for a while. And when he passed away, I think he only had $300 in his savings account, which was really kind of sad. Millions of dollars of paintings, but yes.
Did he ever fit in? I had read stories that he wanted to fit in with the elite, but he was a circus.
Yeah, he never did. Yeah, he never did, and he just didn't. I think he tried. He had money and he lived high, but he was kind of always on the outskirts. And there's some areas of the museum. There's an Astor Cream room where he was able to buy these fancy families. They ran out of money or whatever, and he'd buy all their stuff and then put it in his museum, which I thought was kind of funny actually. But yeah, he could never quite do that. And I think towards the end he really didn't care very much, but probably, earlier on he might have a little bit more. So, and another interesting aspect was that somebody maybe not little known, but was that John and the relationship of John with his brother Charles. Charles was the people person. John was like kind of the brains behind the whole thing in terms of strategy, and John made a lot of his money through oil and railroads and things like that the others didn't. And then Charles, it was like John and Mabel and Charles and Edith, and they all moved to Sarasota, and they kind of competed with each other. I mean, Charles lived where New College is now. I think that's the main building there. And they kind of competed with each other, and that actually towards the end of his life, because there was this rivalry, especially between them, is that's one of the reasons why John lost the circus, because Charles's widow Edith and another man who was supposed to be John's friend, they took the circus away from him, and he was, that was really hard. So there was a lot of fractious type stuff going on, typical of family businesses.
So the way your book is sort of structured, where you have the different rings, and I'm wondering, because of course you mentioned how the final chapter makes you a bit emotional. What was the most fun chapter to write?
I think it was, let me think, that's a good question too. You're asking good questions. Well, the beginning of it, because I was just learning about Florida. And there was stuff that I didn't know, and I thought, I could really use this. This is so much fun. I found all these odd things, and I could put them into play. Anytime I find a work, and this is true of the book I'm working on now, anytime I find something that's kind of undiscovered, raw material that I can play with and kind of do, of course with nonfiction it has to be factual, but it can use my imagination. Anything that's been written, the challenge there is to try to make something fresh and unique about it.
So in writing this book about the villages, I'm guessing that some of your research into Florida has informed that book. Is that the case?
Well, I visited the villages extensively. The story about the villages is this. In 2009, I went down with my friends. I had no idea what it was. And I was much younger then. And maybe I was close to the minimal age, which is 55. And I went down there with my friends. I had no idea what it was. And we stayed in a condo. And frankly, I thought I'd died and gone to where, the other place. I'm like, what is this? What? And they were all riding around in shopping carts, and it was like they have these bands, and all these people were standing there getting drunk, and it was like the pod people. I mean, this is a terrible thing to say, but I mean, there are very many nice people there. Hopefully the people that will buy my book will also be in the villages.
This video will also be on the internet.
I know, oh no. Well, they're going to come after me with the villagers, or hopefully will not come after me with pitchforks and whatever. But but now that I've been there, and now that I've lived down here, I understand a lot more of the appeal. And people live there, and they like it there, and they understand it, and it's gotten a lot bigger. And when I was there, and my book is actually set in 2009, it was not diverse, and now it is more diverse. And there's a lot of different things that you can do. And it's financially, it makes sense to live there because you know exactly what you're paying and what you're going to get. And that is very appealing. So, and there's a million things to do there. I mean, so many things to do from the minute you get up to the minute you go to bed. And then they have happy hour at 11 o'clock. Yes, Terry.
So, Mabel died earlier than John, right?
Yeah, she died, I think, in 1929.
And then he remarried.
Right, to Emily, yes.
And she actually financed him, didn't she?
She did. It's interesting that you say that, because a lot of people, one of the myths that I found was interesting was that a lot of people thought she was like a gold digger because she had her own money and she wanted to get her hands on his money. But actually, she was trying to help him because people were taking things away from him, and he was scared. He lost his wife. The stock market crash had happened, and money that, all his assets were tied up in his art, and art was worth nothing because nothing was worth nothing back then. And she tried to help him, and he wouldn't listen. And they didn't get along. I mean, they just were like oil and water. I mean, it was unlike Mabel, where they were so compatible and so in sync with each other. And he wouldn't listen to her. And so she divorced him, and she tried to get money from him, and he wouldn't do it. So, yeah.
Are there books on her too?
I think there is. There's one called The Second Wife, and I think it's a novel. I'm not sure, but it's called The Second Wife.
We can check for you downstairs.
Yeah.
What about John Ringling? You don't hear much about him?
John Ringling.
Sorry, Charles.
Charles. You don't know. I think that he was the people person. They called him Mr. Charlie. All the circus people loved him. In the new college, they have an extensive bunch of, and this is something that didn't get in my book, was all this correspondence was so great. Actually, I'm doing a PowerPoint presentation at some of the libraries. It's on my website over at Manatee County. And they had pictures of, the different acts writing, wanting to be there, and all. That's what Charles took care of, was all of that.
So did he end his days in that house?
Yeah, he and Edith lived there, and he died, I think, before. John was the last one alive. And he died, they all died pretty much of, I don't know what, high blood pressure, heart disease. And Charles died, I think, a few years before John. He was pretty much a normal guy. He had a family, he had kids. They were very close. John was always wanted to do things his way, and Charles got really irritated with him sometimes. So that was the kind of the thing. John would get up at 3:00 in the afternoon, and Charles would be ready to go home and have dinner, and John would want to meet. That kind of thing. So. But yeah, there's not much written about Charles. Of course, I didn't really look at that deeply into it because, like I said, I had my 3 rings that I had to focus on, and more than enough information about that.
And you're writing like the entire history of Florida, so it's also.
Well, it's not the entire. It's just
it's a big
Sarasota.
undertaking.
Yeah, not the entire history.
It's a lot. Any other questions?
Is the Selby related? The Selby Gardens, is that related to the Ringlings too?
I think I have that in my book. I don't think so. That's from Marie Selby, and I think she was a philanthropist. Although Mabel had the Rose Garden, which is at the Ringling, and that's really. And then the Sarasota Garden Club, which I've been trying to get a hold of them for me to do a program. And if anybody's from there, tell them I'm trying to call. That's from Mabel. That she started the garden club years ago. So,
Good.
Nora.
Oh,
Oh.
no, I'm leaving to James.
Oh.
Sorry. Yeah, don't want to work here.
What did Sarasota look like when the Ringlings arrived, and how did it change over the course of his lifetime?
Well, when he arrived, now because I talk about that, I talk about the people that founded Sarasota. It all sort of happened at once. I mean, when John got there, I think it was 1911 or 1912. Like I said, my brain, I don't quote me. It's in the book. It was nothing. It was dirt roads. There were fish. It was a fishing town. People were fishing. There were cowboys, and this is something I didn't know about Florida. They had cowboys and lots of ranching. Maybe not around here, more around Central Florida. And then when John got here, he got there, and then all of a sudden, all these people came. Of course, I can't remember the names, but the various the guy with the golf cars came that built all the golf courses, and then the woman who does who's the woman that Bertha? Yes, yeah. She came.
Bertha Palmer.
Bertha Palmer, thank you. And she came, and it just all evolved with that time. Though John didn't know Bertha Palmer, they never crossed paths. Interestingly enough, so because I think John mostly just came here in the 20s, and I believe 1920s, and Bertha was there before then. So it just was evolving as he got there, and it just evolved into this really fun little town with lots of cool and interesting things. They had the Miss Sarah DeSoto badge, and I talk about that, and so yeah.
So did circus performers come down for this circus, or did he hire people who were already living here?
Well, no, he had, for what? The performers,
For the
they came
circus.
from all over the United States, yeah. And they actually wintered here, and one of the interesting myths about that is that he built houses for them, and he specifically built houses for the little people. He did not. There was a lady in the 1940s who wanted to have built, and this is also in my book, wanted to have a city for the little people. And then another myth was that he used elephants to build St. Armand's and to build Ringling Bridge. He did not. He was a Republican. They wanted him to bring elephants to the Republican National Conventions, and he said no. Those elephants are delicate and they're expensive, and they are not coming. So he did not use circus animals. He may have used some circus people to give them employment in the summer when they weren't working to build things, but no, that's not something he did. And they came from all over the world. And somebody told me a lot of them came from Italy, but I don't know. And that could be too. I don't really know. That's one thing I don't really know a lot about. It's the circus performers. So
There could be a sequel. All right, well, we'll save some time. We have some time for Sandra to sign some books, and we
Okay.
still have some available down at the front. So if you haven't gotten your copy yet and you bought a ticket that came with a copy, your copy is waiting for you right downstairs at the register. And again, we do have more copies, and we also have a couple of copies of some of Sandra's other books down at the front.
the two novels, Country Club Wives, and Country Club Wives is a satire about women, money, and homeless animals in New Wellington, Ohio. Pipe Dreamers is a more serious historical novel about the 60s, which I do remember, and the student protest movement. And then the other one is Confessions of a Crazy Cat Lady, which is my little chapbook of essays that I had published in various places. And then I have Myths and Mysteries of Ohio. So that's the other one if you're interested. So thank you.
So let's give Sandra a round of applause.